Hello and welcome back, everyone. So today we have to talk about a hot story that hit recently, which is Joe Rogan joining Gettr, the social media app and competitor to Twitter. And this came on the heels of his interview with Dr. Malone recently. And recently, I had to do a story about Gettr in particular because of a kind of a, let's say, YouTube slash Twitter rabbit hole that I recently went down that I thought was really relevant for everybody who's thinking about potentially joining Gettr. There's a mass exodus right now out of Twitter as folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene and others are getting suspended. And a lot of people who formerly were hesitant or not really on the platform have been thinking about it. So I thought it might be good to do sort of a double click on what we know about Gettr, and particularly one particular angle of Gettr, which is a mysterious Chinese billionaire who is basically one of the funders, if you would, or backers of the project. And this really came out of a recent statement by big social media influencer Anthony Brian Logan, or ABL, who the other day said, why the mass exodus to Gettr when it is funded by China? And when I did some digging on this, and then ABL also has basically an entire article kind of going deeper into this, encouraging you to check it out if you want to get some more context there. But he links in this article to a sort of an ongoing actual federal lawsuit against one of the backers of Gettr. So Gettr, the founder or potentially co-founder of it is Miles Guo Wengi. Hopefully, I'm just going to call him Miles Kwok from now on. Who basically he's facing a lawsuit in federal court, and he's alleged to be receiving money from a CCP member named William G. And this is basically kind of a rundown of how that story is, or how that case is going as of this past July. And he makes some pretty salient statements and receives some fairly salient accusations. So I thought it would be worth just trying to do a little bit of a double click into who is this guy, Miles Guo / Miles Kwok, and what do we know about him as folks think about joining the platform. And really, this is because, if you just Google Gettr, you basically find two angles for every single article. One is, Gettr's relationship to Trump and to the Trump campaign. Folks like Jason Miller, and related individuals associated with Trump. And the other angle, which is maybe even more popular, is this sort of mysterious Chinese billionaire. So you see it here on Politico, you see it here on NBC News, and you even see it here at Yahoo Finance, talking about this connection to a Chinese billionaire. So I thought it would be worth it. We know a fair bit about Trump at this point, right? But, we don't really know who the heck this Chinese billionaire is. So let's just take a little bit of a look into that. And, when I first looked at this story, I was kind of to an extent reminded of, China's, let's say, tumultuous relationship with billionaires. They produce the most billionaires in the world, but also billionaires there don't fare particularly well. There was a study that said about 17% of them ended up in court or in jail, and some are even worse off here. And then many of them actually end up losing, big parts of their fortune. They can get disappeared. Various things can happen much more frequently than the billionaires here in the U.S. And so it didn't strike me as super surprising that a Chinese billionaire would basically pretend to be against the let's say communist tyranny, and would back a free speech platform or an alleged free speech platform like Gettr. And let's just look a little bit into who this guy Miles Guo is. And so, first of all, this is one of the websites that he kind of runs or started, G News, which is kind of a giant part of his G Media sort of organization. And it, apparently stands for rule of law, rule of society, and they just do a roundup of news from sort of their perspective on what they think is relevant across the world. So he described himself, Miles Guo, as the leader of the whistleblower movement, leader of the new federal state of China, founder of and consultant for this organization here, G Media, which includes this G News. And he alleges to have gotten his money, his wealth, primarily in real estate in China over several decades. So that's kind of his sort of backstory, if you would. Let's go a little bit into more of the substance here. So what I had a question about was, so let's just take a step back. When I think about whether or not, and this is just my perspective on it, someone is trustworthy or at least reliable. I think about it from a few different angles. Number one is, what was their record of making accurate predictions in the past? It's not so much about trust for me. I mean, whether or not someone's good or evil, whether or not someone's, moral or immoral, time will tell. Information, changes and perspective changes, and ultimately only God, can kind of finally judge and knows all the secrets, right? But for me, it's more helpful to say, how reliable is someone more so than trustworthy. It's a very arbitrary thing. People's trust can get betrayed all the time. And look at how many people, betrayed, quote unquote, the trust of, Trump, or feel as if he betrayed them. It's just a big problem. Anyway, so there's a lot of stuff that this guy, Miles Guo, Miles Kwok, gets right. And for me, that's the number one most important thing for whether or not I should consider someone as reliable or not. So a few things. First of all, this is just linking to a few interviews that he had recently. This was with HBO Vice. It's a very contentious interview earlier this year. And this is actually the raw cut of it because HBO Vice has their own version. Super interesting and also super contentious interview that he does with the interviewer there. Very hostile. And then he has a much more friendly interview from a few years ago with a company called Real Vision Finance and Kyle Bass. And in this interview, he actually makes a prediction, which is that China will take over Hong Kong. And this was in 2019. And we all know that in 2020, that actually happened. He also predicts the arrest of Jack Ma after, I guess, Jack Ma was forced to sell some shares. That, to our knowledge, seems to have happened as well. Jack Ma effectively disappeared for, a good part of kind of the past year and change. And he talks about in other parts of this HBO video, things like the mask and PPE supply chain shortage at the very beginning of this sort of pandemic. He basically called that out as being a risk area, and turns out he was right about that. It was one of the first to call out the injustice of the Uyghur Muslims in China, and now it's suddenly become a big fad. And then he's made many allegations about the coup itself. So he was really one of the first to, at least in the public eye, to really talk about this sort of lab leak hypothesis, to talk about human to human transmission. This is back in January of 2020, even before the CDC and the Trump administration really kind of joined the train. And so it's one of those things where when I look at a guy like this, my number one determinative factor about whether or not I should, even give them the time of day is how reliable have they been. And truth be told, he's come across so far as being fairly reliable. What he says, a few months or a few years later ends up actually happening, at least to a pretty high degree of success rate. Obviously, no one's hit rate is 100%. But it's definitely well above 50% for this individual. So that's a very, very, very positive sign. It's all about the receipts for me, guys. Like, who has the receipts, and give it a few weeks, give it a few months, who turns out to be correct. All other things are secondary or even tertiary. The second one, and this is why I stopped at this part of the video, is I try to get a sense of suffering, right? Or let's say persecution. So if one of the allegations that's brought up in this interview is whether or not Miles Kwok is actually sort of a double agent, or a secret CCP asset, right? Who's actually working for them but not against them. And I was like, kind of a strong accusation there, very spy movie like. And one of the things that helps to dispel that is, in terms of determining the authenticity of someone's sort of conviction, is whether or not they've actually suffered for the cause. Like what have they suffered, and to what extent, and how is that shaken out? And it turns out, and at this part in the interview, and I'll link this in the description below, he actually talks about how it all started. And so he I guess was providing some donations to folks during the 1989 Tiananmen Square incident, and he was arrested for something like 22 months and tortured for about 8 of those months. And he saw many people pass away during that time. And, in addition to that, apparently his brother lost his life at the hands of the CCP. He's had his parents abused in various ways as well. And he says that recently his mother passed away as well. So it's one of those things where, I look at his life and his own abuse, his family's abuse. And then he also mentions that he has hundreds of associates as part of his sort of media, let's say G Media organization, and maybe other business ventures who've also suffered at the hands of CCP, gotten thrown in jail, arrested, beaten, disappeared, whatever. So I look at that and I'm like, hey, I don't really have the capacity. I don't speak Chinese. I'm not super familiar with this culture and the context here. But for a guy who basically has apparently suffered material losses by the CCP, he doesn't come across as necessarily someone who would have a compelling motivation to suddenly want to work for them. So that was kind of an interesting one. And, as a billionaire already, it doesn't seem like he necessarily needs additional money, right? Like he can just be bought off. That doesn't seem to be particularly likely as well. The next thing that I look for is powerful and let's say the right enemies. You have the right enemies on the right side. And I just did a little reference because in the interview with HBO, he actually says that he has like 60 to 70 pending lawsuits right now, or let's say ongoing lawsuits. And I thought that was a heck of a number. So I ended up doing a little cross check against just to see how does that compare to Donald Trump? So to my knowledge, Donald Trump is probably the most sued individual in American life today, at least American political life today. And it turns out that Donald Trump and his sort of family and business venture and business empire has currently about 18 active criminal and civil cases against them, according to Just Security. And so I look at that and I think, wow, so this Miles Guo character has, over 3 times as many, active cases against him, pretty much none of which he can speak about. So you see, like, even in this HBO interview, he actually, says, hey, I can't talk about this, I can't talk about that in a few instances, because I guess his lawyer's in the room helping to kind of give him a little bit of cover and protection. So that's interesting. Okay. And then not only is he very, let's say, judicious, but he's actually had some like bona fide attempts to be extradited back to China. In terms of his enemies trying to bring him back to China. And one case that stood out in this interview is a situation with Elliot Broidy, who I guess is a lobbyist with connections to the Trump administration. And so this guy is actually he pled guilty last October of 2020, I should say, to before a U.S. district judge to one count of conspiracy to violate the Foreign Agents Registration Act. So long story short, this guy took millions and millions of dollars from the Chinese Communist Party to basically do their bidding. And a big part of that, one part was about, 1 MDB, but the other part was about getting this guy Miles Quag / Miles Guo back to China. And so to the extent that this individual actually lobbied one of the richest people in the world. So let me just slow down a little bit. So here are the two associates, right, that basically admitted that, hey, yeah, we tried to get Guo removed from the country. They actually, they're very well connected, obviously, which would make them ripe targets for the CCP to, give money to influence policy. So apparently these individuals, they came to win. That's of Wynn Resorts, the big sort of casino company in Vegas. And he, so I guess these guys, these two associates, but went in touch with Chinese government officials to express their desire to get Guo expelled from the U.S. And so this billionaire, Steve Wynn, then allegedly asked Trump to expel Guo. Guo is obviously a wanted fugitive in China, even though, he says he's an innocent man. And specifically, it looks like Wynn asked Trump to deny Guo's request for a U.S. visa. And Guo, the President Trump declined to get involved. So he did not honor that request, which kept Guo in the United States. So crazy act of, if you want to talk about double agent and espionage, this, from all intents and purposes, at least from this story, it seems more like the enemies of Guo are participating in that sort of behavior as opposed to Guo himself, at least from this story. So that's one thing. And then, to be honest, I'm reminded of the Chinese Communist Party's sort of approach to what they call unrestricted warfare, and the ability to use any and all means in order to, eliminate a threat. So political means, financial means, legal means, you name it, psychological, means, media corruption, corporate power, whatever it can use outside of, let's say, hot action from a conflict standpoint, they will and have and are using. Okay. So this seems to be, at least based on what I know, and shout out to Joshua Phillips of Crossroads, who's really been one of the eye openers for me in that sort of field, and definitely worth checking out his work. And so, yeah, powerful enemies, and not to mention actual court wins, right? Because this person went to federal prison for this situation. And so I think, one of the things that he mentions here is that the media is not the judge. The courts are the judge. And so as of right now, he hasn't gotten arrested. And to my knowledge, he hasn't been found guilty of any of those cases that have been brought against him. In fact, he actually lists off several that he says he's been found not guilty of. Right. So at least as of right now, there seems to be some correlation between his side and the side of truth. And no one's kicked him out of the country yet or taken him to jail based upon what's been alleged against him. And I'll go back to this part of the interview because he actually hits on two big things, which is, why do you hate the CCP so much? You can't just come and say, oh, I want to, take down the CCP. You have to actually get some context. And so definitely encourage you to check out this part beginning at, 1 hour and 23 minutes in. But then he goes to what I would even maybe consider the sort of the juicier question. And, kudos to the interview, even though she was, just insanely frustrating to listen to. But she asked the question of, hey, look, if you made an enemy of the CCP back around circa 1989, and went to jail and so forth, how in the world did you get wealthy in China? Right, over that time and the years to come preceding that? Typically, to get wealthy in China, there's an understanding that you have to play ball with the government. You have to sort of be part of the team. You can't be sort of an enemy of this of the team if you want to get certain contracts and certain agreements. And it's fascinating because he basically goes into, like, rails into this interviewer, and basically says he trained himself. I wanted to grow my body. I wanted to prepare my mind. Was I supposed to fight this person or the CCP at the age of 1? Fresh out of my mother's womb. Like, you have to prepare for a conflict. You can't just do it willy nilly, which makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking about like Sun Tzu and the art of war. You don't just stand up one day and say, I want to take down, the most, powerful entity in the most powerful entity in the world. You have to really do some preparations for that. And so he basically says, I formed relationships. I did what I could in order to, here he is, prepare money, prepare cars. So he made a lot of preparations over the years. And presumably, he, at least how he's painting the picture, kind of kept his resentment, to himself, right? So that way he can actually, sweeten relationships and get the right opportunities, the right contracts, and become successful. And then laying all the groundwork for him to launch this sort of counter strike, if you would, against the CCP. So that's his story. Do I believe him or not? It's kind of a secondary. Whether you believe him a lot is even a secondary pitch. But at least he did respond to the question and say, "Hey, it's possible still to make money, maybe to recant, maybe to apologize, and to the police officers. But in your heart, you're thinking, okay, I will, take action one day." And he actually kind of reminds me here. I was just thinking about like V for Vendetta. So you have folks like V, who were part of the government. I think V was part of special forces, and then at some point he gets experimented on and escapes from his sort of experimentation lab with all the other subjects there. And then he basically goes underground, V does. And, years and years later, after plotting meticulously about how he'll, take down whatever the government is in V for Vendetta, he actually exacts that sort of plan meticulously and executes on it. So I think that, I'm almost reminded of that individual in this case. He knows the CCP so well because he was part of it for so many years, and he still has connections and back channels and knowledge and things of that nature. And he also knows how to use their cards against them, and many, many secrets that the average person wouldn't know unless they had gone through that and been part of that special forces team. And rubbed shoulders with some of those heavy elites as a so-called ally, even though he harbored resentment in his heart for many years and planned to do this when the time was right. Though you don't just do it out of the blue. When the time is right, you take your opportunity. Another good example might be someone like kind of a Boruto. So Mitsuki, there's this whole story, this arc in Boruto about Mitsuki, and I recently got turned on Boruto maybe like a month or so last December, and I thought for a while Mitsuki actually betrayed the Leaf Village. Turns out he actually did not, and he took on this mission and went to extreme lengths to really put himself out there as if he was betraying the village. Turns out it was basically a secret operation. He had to look suspicious in order to achieve it. It was a mission that only he could fulfill. There's a lot of circumstances around that, but he had to endure a lot of pain and scrutiny from a lot of people, including his best friend Boruto, in order to accomplish that mission. As sort of a, let's say, of a scientific human, like he's not a regular human. He was with other scientifically created humans in order to remove them as a threat from the ninja world. So that was my second thing. In my mind, Miles Kwok / Miles Guo is potentially behaving a little bit like a Mitsuki here. So So that's really kind of the wrap there for Miles Kwok. I'm gonna leave it to you guys in terms of whether or not you think this individual is above board or not. Listen, I don't want to gloss over the one this federal lawsuit that's highlighted against him. I mean, he says two things that are particularly, let's say, kind of troubling. You know, one is there's a spat here in which he basically admits that he signed a letter to Xi Jinping saying that he, quote, didn't cross or did not cross the red line in exposing too much dirt on CCP leaders. That's suspect. Don't know what that is all about. And then secondly, you know, look, if you're a billionaire, why do you need to take money from some CCP member named William G? It doesn't seem like you would even need that, right? Those financial resources, you should be able to fund it himself. What could be some other opportunity or some other explanation? Maybe William G is a fellow dissident, right, or someone who's defecting from the CCP, but in secret, right? And maybe this is a loyalty test on that defection. Maybe it's not a loyalty test, but he just wants to get his money out of China. You never really know what's happening behind closed doors. Nonetheless, it definitely puts him in a tight position where he's taking this money from William G. But again, like why would you say I didn't cross the red line? If you look at his 2017 interview, I mean, the only thing that I can possibly suspect is there's probably like some sort of priority list for threat levels. And if you look back in this 19 interview with Real Vision Finance, he actually says this interview with Kyle Bass, he brings up the many names. One of them is Xi Jinping, and he says, well, I don't know if I can talk about that. He's basically hesitant to talk about certain things or certain individuals. And, I get the sense that maybe he's just trying to lower or like mitigate the extent to which he's going to be target number one of the CCP. The CCP has many enemies, and they have lots of resources around the world. But maybe he's trying to like not step on like let's say a proverbial landmine too often and too directly, and maybe potentially even doing some level of lip service, let's say, right, to someone like a Xi Jinping, just to make it seem as if he's playing ball, or he has a difference of opinion, but he still agrees on certain things. I don't know the answer to that. I know that he was put on the red list several years ago, actually, by, I think, was it Interpol or some sort of intelligence agency, and that came after an interview that he had with the Voice of America, right? So I don't know whose tree he barked up when he had the interview with the Voice of America, but I guess there were some very powerful people who didn't like that interview or didn't like him, and actually he was added to a red list, on the intelligence community's red list. So stuff like that is, I think he's trying to maintain his priorities, even as he quote unquote goes to war against the CCP, and maybe try not to cross too many people all at once in every single way possible. But you have to be very strategic about these things. That way you don't make too many enemies too quickly, and potentially, jeopardize your own success if you are indeed playing the long game. So in conclusion, I would say make your own decision. Is this guy above board? Maybe. I'm leaning towards maybe yes, but it's still a maybe. But I'll leave that to you guys to decide whether or not this individual is above board, whether or not his app Gettr is worth joining. Whether or not that's an operation to jeopardize your data and your security. My conclusion is maybe he is above board. Maybe he is okay, but there's too many questionable things right now to have 100% certainty. I know that for a guy who's 3 times as embattled as Donald Trump, every single media organization, every single lever of power is going to be weaponized against him, right, to discredit him. So I come in with that lens in this type of situation, And look, I would also say, to what extent do you think Steve Bannon is above board, right? If someone comes to you and they're say, "Hey, I want to introduce you to my friend, so so and so," it's reasonable to say, "How much do I trust you?" And if you trust your friend, right, maybe you will trust him as well. So think about whether or not you like or respect or trust Steve Bannon. Personally, I became a fan of Steve Bannon after his interview with Tim Pool earlier last year. He that was my first time listening to him for more than a couple minutes, and I was like, okay, this guy comes across as fairly reasonable. Steve Bannon does. He's not a crazy person at all, and some of his opinions are left, some of his opinions are right, and ultimately he falls under the populist category politically, and seemed to be above board. He also predicted that the parents in Virginia would have a big role in the outcome of the Virginia election, and that came to pass. And as I mentioned before in this video, ultimately the receipts are where it's at for me, right? As a single biggest determination about whether or not someone's reliable, you have to have a record of making accurate predictions. And so that series of events, that Temple interview and that subsequent aftermath, for me, that made Steve Bannon above board in my mind. And therefore I'm inclined to give a friend of Steve Bannon, an associate of him, like Miles Guo, the benefit of the doubt for now. But again, up to you to decide. Hope you make a good decision, and hopefully this information has been useful. Thanks for listening to today's rundown. If you liked what you heard, please comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.